It is a cold day in March 1872 in the small mining town of West Auckland in County Durham, England. Inside a cramped terraced house on Front Street, a 7-year-old boy named Charles Edward Cotton is dying. He has been sick for days. His stomach is in agony. He vomits constantly, unable to keep down even water. His body is racked with painful spasms. He cries for help, for relief, but nothing eases his suffering. The local doctor, Dr. Kilburn, has been called multiple times. He diagnoses gastric fever, a common illness in Victorian England that kills thousands every year, especially children. The boy's stepmother, Mary Ann Cotton, tends to him with what appears to be devoted care. She brings him tea, holds his hand, wipes his brow. The neighbors see her through the window and think what a good woman she is, how tenderly she cares for the poor dying child. On March 12, 1872, after days of terrible suffering, Charles Edward Cotton dies in his bed. He is 7 years old. Dr. Kilburn is called to certify the death. But this time, something makes him pause. He looks at Mary Ann Cotton, the devoted stepmother who has just lost another family member, and he remembers something. This woman has lost a lot of family members. Her husband, Frederick, died last year. His son, also named Frederick, died shortly after. Her lover, Joseph Nattrass, died just 2 weeks ago. In fact, Dr. Kilburn realizes with a growing sense of unease, everyone in Mary Ann Cotton's life seems to die. Her children, her husbands, her stepchildren, all of them dead from gastric fever or similar ailments. All of them tended by Mary Ann in their final days. Dr. Kilburn makes a decision. He refuses to sign the death certificate. He tells Mary Ann he needs to investigate further to be certain of the cause of death. He expects her to be upset, to argue, but Mary Ann simply smiles and agrees. She has no reason to worry. She has done this before, many times before. But there is someone else who is suspicious. His name is Thomas Riley, and he is a local official who handles workhouse admissions. Just a week before Charles died, Mary Ann had come to him with an unusual request. She wanted to place Charles in the workhouse, essentially an orphanage for the destitute. Riley had asked why. The boy had a home, a family. Why send him away? And Mary Ann had said something that Riley could not forget. She said, irritated by his questions, "It might not matter. Perhaps he'll go like all the rest of the Cotton family. Like all the rest." Those words haunted Riley. What did she mean? Riley began asking questions in the neighborhood, and what he learned chilled him to the bone. Everywhere Mary Ann Cotton had lived, people died. Husbands, children, lovers, all dead. All suddenly, all from similar illnesses. Riley went to the police with his suspicions, and the police, finally, began to pay attention. They ordered an autopsy on Charles Edward Cotton. The boy's small body was opened and examined. Samples of his organs were sent to specialists in Leeds for a new kind of test, the Marsh test, which could detect the presence of arsenic. The results came back quickly. Charles Edward Cotton's body contained massive amounts of arsenic, enough to kill multiple grown men. This boy had not died of gastric fever. He had been murdered, poisoned slowly, painfully, by someone who fed him arsenic-laced tea as he begged for help. And the most likely person to have poisoned him was the woman who had tended him so devotedly in his final days, his stepmother, Mary Ann Cotton. The police began exhuming other bodies. Mary Ann's recent victims buried in the local churchyard. One by one, they dug them up, And one by one, the tests came back positive. Arsenic, arsenic, arsenic. In September 1872, Mary Ann Cotton was arrested for murder. And as investigators traced back through her life, following her movements from town to town across northern England, they discovered something that shocked Victorian society to its core. The devoted mother, the loving wife, the angel in the house, who cared for the sick and dying, she was a monster. She had been murdering people for 20 years, her own children, her husbands, her stepchildren, anyone who stood between her and money, or convenience, or freedom. The death toll was staggering. At least 21 people, possibly more than 40. Mary Ann Cotton was one of the most prolific serial killers in British history. And almost no one had suspected her because she was a woman, a mother, someone who society assumed could never do such things. Before we continue this story, I want to ask you something. If you believe the darkest chapters of history deserve to be told, if you believe the victims of the past deserve to be remembered, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support allows us to keep telling these stories. Tonight, we will trace the life of Mary Ann Cotton, from her desperate beginnings to her terrible end. We will count the victims, name them, honor them. We will understand how Victorian society's blind spots allowed a killer to operate for decades. We will witness the trial that shocked a nation. And we will ask the hardest question: how does a mother murder her own children? This is not just a true crime story. This is a story about poverty, about gender, about how society protects some monsters simply because they look like the people we trust most. It is about the victims, especially the children, who had no voice, no power, no escape. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. Mary Ann Robson was born in October 1832 in the village of Low Moorsley in County Durham in the north of England. If you were born into a mining family in the 1830s, England, you were born into hardship. This was the heart of the Industrial Revolution, when coal was king and men went deep into the earth every day to bring it up, destroying their bodies for pennies. Mary Ann's father, Michael Robson, was a miner. He worked in darkness and danger, breathing coal dust that would eventually kill him, as it killed most miners. Her mother, Margaret, was a miner's wife, which meant she raised a house full of children on almost no money, stretched every penny, and watched half of them die in infancy. Mary Ann was one of 16 children born to her parents. Only 8 survived to adulthood. Read that again. 16 children born, 8 died. That was normal. In the 1830s and 1840s, infant and child mortality in industrial England was horrific. Children died of measles, scarlet fever, cholera, tuberculosis, malnutrition, accidents. Death was so common that parents sometimes didn't even name their babies until they were a few months old, fearing the pain of losing a named child. Mary Ann grew up surrounded by death. She watched siblings sicken and die. She watched her mother grieve, then shrug, then move on, because what else could you do? You couldn't stop working. You couldn't afford to fall apart. You had other children to feed. This environment, where children were disposable, where death was normal, where emotion was a luxury you couldn't afford, shaped Mary Ann profoundly. She learned early that children died, and life went on. She learned that death was not special or tragic. It was just something that happened. She also learned that she was beautiful, which in her world was one of the few advantages a poor woman could have. She was described by those who knew her as striking, with dark hair and bright eyes. She was charming, with a quick smile and an easy manner. She was also fiercely intelligent and ambitious. Mary Ann wanted more than the life her mother had: endless pregnancy, endless poverty, watching your children die. She wanted nice things. She wanted comfort. She wanted a life that didn't grind you down to nothing by the time you were 40. But she had no education, no money, no prospects. For a woman in her position, there was only one way up: marriage. In 1852, at age 20, Mary Ann married a man named William Mowbray. He was a labourer, not much different from her father, but he had steady work and he seemed kind. They had a small wedding and set up house together, starting their married life in the traditional way. Mary Ann began having children almost immediately. This too was normal. Birth control was primitive and unreliable. For most working-class women, marriage meant constant pregnancy. Between 1852 and 1865, over 13 years, Mary Ann gave birth to 8 or 9 children. The exact number is unclear because records for the poor were spotty, but we know the names of some of them: Margaret Jane, Isabella, Margaret, and others whose names have been lost to history. And here is where the darkness begins. By 1865, only 2 of those children were still alive. The others had died, some in infancy, some in early childhood. The causes listed on their death certificates, when there were death certificates, were typical: gastric fever, convulsions, scarlet fever. Again, this wasn't unusual. Child mortality was high. Neighbours would have shaken their heads and said poor Mary Ann was unlucky, but not suspiciously so. But there was one thing that was unusual. Each time a child died, Mary Ann had taken out a small insurance policy on them through a burial club, a working-class insurance scheme where you paid a penny or 2 a week, and when someone died, you received a few pounds to cover funeral costs. Each child's death brought Mary Ann £3 to £5. Not a fortune, but significant money for a labourer's family. Enough to buy food, pay rent, survive a rough patch. Did Mary Ann kill her own children in the 1850s and 1860s? We will never know for certain. Their bodies were never exhumed. But looking back, with the knowledge of what she would definitely do later, many historians believe the killing started here. That Mary Ann discovered that children died easily and often, and that sometimes their deaths could be helpful. In 1865, William Mowbray himself died suddenly. He was in his 30s, seemingly healthy one week, dead the next. The diagnosis was gastric fever. He complained of stomach pain, vomiting, diarrhea. He suffered for several days, then died. His wife nursed him devotedly through his final illness. Mary Ann collected the insurance money from William's policy. She was now a widow at 33, with 2 surviving daughters. She did not stay a widow for long. Within a year of William's death, Mary Ann married again. Her new husband was named George Ward, and he was also a labourer. The speed of this remarriage raised a few eyebrows among her neighbours, but it wasn't scandalous. Widows needed to remarry to survive. Women couldn't earn enough on their own to support children. George Ward's marriage to Mary Ann lasted 14 months. In August 1866, George became ill with the now familiar symptoms: stomach pain, vomiting, terrible intestinal distress. The doctor diagnosed English cholera, a disease that killed through dehydration and electrolyte imbalance, often within days. George Ward died. Mary Ann collected the insurance. She was a widow again. 2 husbands, both dead within months of marrying her. Both insured, both dying of gastrointestinal illnesses. Still, nobody suspected murder. Why would they? Mary Ann appeared to be simply an unlucky woman, and in Victorian England, death was so common that patterns were hard to see. But Mary Ann had now learned something very important. Husbands were worth more dead than alive. A living husband might drink his wages, might be cruel, might be a burden. A dead husband left insurance money and no obligations. Let's pause here to understand the weapon Mary Ann used: arsenic. In Victorian England, arsenic was everywhere. It was used to kill rats in homes, shops, and warehouses. It was an ingredient in wallpaper dyes, creating fashionable colors. It was used in cosmetics and medicines. You could buy it at any chemist shop or general store for a few pennies. There were no regulations, no questions asked. You just said you needed it for rats, and the shopkeeper would sell it to you. Arsenic was odorless and nearly tasteless. A small amount dissolved in tea or soup would be completely undetectable. And the symptoms of arsenic poisoning, stomach pain, vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, were identical to several common Victorian diseases: gastric fever, cholera, dysentery. Doctors in the 1800s didn't routinely suspect poison. If someone died with gastrointestinal symptoms, they assumed disease, not murder. Autopsies were rare. Chemical analysis of bodies was even rarer. Arsenic was so commonly used for murder in Victorian England that it earned a nickname, inheritance powder, because it was the perfect way to murder an inconvenient relative and collect their money. Mary Ann Cotton had discovered the inheritance powder, and she was about to use it again and again. But Mary Ann's next victim would be different. She wouldn't target a husband this time. She would target something even more shocking, something that would, if it had been discovered then, have horrified Victorian society even more than it horrifies us today. She was about to start killing the children of her new lover, and then his children, and then anyone who stood in the way of her plans. The death toll was about to accelerate, and the pattern that would eventually destroy her was about to become visible. If only someone had been paying attention. In November 1866, just months after George Ward's death, Mary Ann found work as a housekeeper for a man named James Robinson. He was a shipwright, a skilled craftsman who built and repaired ships, and thus a step up in social class from her previous husbands. He was a widower with 5 young children who desperately needed help managing his household. Mary Ann came highly recommended. She was experienced, hardworking, and good with children. Robinson hired her immediately. She moved into his home in Pallion, near Sunderland. And then the dying began. Within weeks of Mary Ann's arrival, James Robinson's youngest child, a 10-month-old baby named John, died suddenly. The doctor diagnosed gastric fever. Robinson grieved, but infant death was tragically common. He was grateful to have Mary Ann there to comfort him and manage the household during his sorrow. Then another of his children died, then another. By the spring of 1867, 3 of Robinson's 5 children were dead. The surviving 2 were older and healthier, but the youngest, most vulnerable children were gone. Mary Ann was wonderful through it all. She nursed the children tenderly. She comforted Robinson. She organized the funerals. She was, in every way, the angel of the house, the Victorian ideal of perfect womanhood. In August 1867, James Robinson married her. She was now Mary Ann Robinson, the wife of a respectable craftsman, mother to his 2 surviving children. But Mary Ann had her own child with her, Isabella, one of her 2 daughters from her first marriage. And in the spring of 1867, before Mary Ann married Robinson, little Isabella fell ill and died. Gastric fever, the doctors said. Mary Ann grieved appropriately and collected the insurance. Then Mary Ann's mother came to visit. Margaret Robson, now elderly and in poor health, arrived at the Robinson household. Within 9 days, she was dead. The speed of her decline was shocking, but she had been frail, and sometimes the elderly simply gave up, doctors said. Mary Ann collected a small insurance payout from her mother's burial club. The pattern was now undeniable, if anyone had been looking at it as a whole. But no one was. Each death was treated as an isolated tragedy, and Mary Ann moved between towns enough that no single doctor, no single community saw the full scope of her trail of death. James Robinson would become the only husband Mary Ann didn't kill, and we know why. Robinson was not a fool. He began to notice that money was disappearing from his home. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. He confronted Mary Ann and discovered she had been stealing from him, selling his possessions, running up debts in his name. He also refused to take out a life insurance policy on himself. Mary Ann pushed him repeatedly to insure his life, claiming it was responsible, that all working men should have insurance. But Robinson said no. He didn't trust her motivations, and he watched her carefully. He noticed how she prepared his food, his tea. He started to refuse meals she brought him if he was alone with her. He never articulated his suspicions. Perhaps he himself didn't fully understand them, but some instinct told him to be careful. Mary Ann realized she couldn't safely kill him. He was too suspicious, too watchful, and too valuable alive. He had a good income and a respectable position. She couldn't collect insurance on him, and she couldn't get access to his money while he was guarding it so carefully. So in 1869, Mary Ann simply left. She abandoned the marriage, took what money she could steal, and moved on. Robinson survived because he was the one man who saw through her, even if he didn't fully understand what he was seeing. Years later, after Mary Ann was arrested, Robinson would realize how close he had come to death. How many nights she might have been planning his murder, how his suspicion and caution had saved his life. After leaving Robinson, Mary Ann moved to the mining town of Walbottle, where she met a man named Frederick Cotton. Frederick was a widower with 2 young sons, Frederick Jr., age 10, and Charles Edward, age 6. There are conflicting records about whether Mary Ann actually married Frederick Cotton or simply lived with him as his common-law wife. Victorian morality publicly condemned such arrangements, but in working-class communities, especially in rough mining towns, they were more common than polite society acknowledged. Mary Ann was also involved with another man, Joseph Nattrass, whom she had known years earlier. Joseph had been a lodger in one of her previous homes, and there are suggestions that they had been lovers. Now he reappeared in her life. This created a problem. Mary Ann was living with Frederick Cotton and his 2 sons, but she wanted Joseph Nattrass. She also discovered she was pregnant, Possibly by Frederick, possibly by Joseph, possibly by someone else entirely. The solution, in Mary Ann's mind, was simple. Frederick Cotton had to die. In September 1871, Frederick Cotton died suddenly. Gastric fever, the doctor said. He suffered the familiar symptoms, the pain, the vomiting, the slow collapse. Mary Ann nursed him devotedly. He died believing his partner loved him and was trying to save him. Mary Ann collected his insurance money. But there was another problem. Frederick's sister, Margaret Cotton, came to help care for Frederick's sons after his death. Margaret was a good woman, concerned for her nephews, wanting to make sure they were properly cared for. Margaret had to go. In March 1872, Margaret Cotton suddenly fell ill. Within days, she was dead. Again, gastric fever. Again, Mary Ann was the devoted caregiver. This left Mary Ann with the two Cotton boys, Frederick Jr. and Charles Edward. And by now, she had convinced Joseph Nattrass to move in with her. They were living together in a small house in West Auckland, playing at being a family. But the two boys were in the way. They were Frederick Cotton's sons, not hers, and they complicated her relationship with Joseph. She tried to get them into the workhouse, but officials refused. She was their guardian, responsible for them. And then, in January 1872, Joseph Nattrass himself died. Gastric fever. He had been healthy, strong, and in his 30s. Within a week of falling ill, he was dead. Some historians believe Mary Ann killed Joseph because he had discovered what she was doing. Others think she killed him for insurance money. Others believe she simply grew tired of him. Whatever the reason, Joseph died in agony, probably confused about why his lover wasn't saving him, not realizing she was the one killing him. Now Frederick Jr. died as well, age 10, gastric fever, another child erased, and that left only Charles Edward Cotton. Age 7, the last obstacle between Mary Ann and complete freedom to start fresh somewhere else. She tried one more time to place him in the workhouse, and when Thomas Riley refused, she made her fatal mistake. She said those words that would haunt her. Maybe it won't matter. Maybe he'll go like all the rest of the Cotton family. Within days, Charles Edward was dead. And this time, finally, someone was paying attention. Let me describe what Mary Ann Cotton actually did, because it's important to understand that this wasn't quick or painless. This wasn't a murder committed in anger or panic. This was slow, deliberate torture. Mary Ann would begin by giving her victims small doses of arsenic, mixed into their tea or food. At first, the symptoms would be mild, a stomachache, some nausea, nothing alarming. The victim would think they were getting a cold or had eaten something that disagreed with them. Mary Ann would comfort them. She would bring them more tea laced with more arsenic. She would make them soup laced with arsenic. She would sit by their bedside, holding their hand as the poison accumulated in their system. Over days, the symptoms would worsen. The stomach pain would become agonizing. The vomiting would become constant. The diarrhea would lead to severe dehydration. The victim would become weak, confused, desperate for relief. And Mary Ann would be there, the devoted caregiver, bringing them sips of water with arsenic, wiping their brow, assuring them they would get better soon. The victim would die slowly, painfully, often taking 3 to 5 days to succumb. Children died faster because their smaller bodies couldn't handle as much poison. But even for a child, it was a horrible death. Mary Ann watched this happen more than 20 times. She watched her own children die this way. She listened to them beg her for help. She looked into their eyes as the light faded, and she felt nothing. Or if she felt something, it wasn't enough to stop her from doing it again and again and again. By the summer of 1872, Mary Ann Cotton had killed at least 15 people, probably more. She had perfected her method. She had evaded suspicion for 20 years. She had moved from town to town, leaving bodies behind her like breadcrumbs. She should have stopped after Charles Edward. She should have taken the insurance money and disappeared to another city, another region, started fresh where no one knew her history. But she made mistakes. She spoke carelessly to Thomas Riley. She allowed Dr. Kilburn to investigate Charles's death. She was confident, after so many successful murders, that she was untouchable. That confidence would destroy her, because the science that would finally catch her, forensic toxicology, the chemical analysis of human tissue, was improving rapidly in Victorian England. The Marsh test for arsenic had only been developed in 1836. It was becoming more widely used, more reliable, more accessible. Mary Ann Cotton had gotten away with murder for decades because the science to catch her didn't exist yet. But now it did. And when they dug up Charles Edward Cotton's small body and tested his organs for arsenic, they found enough poison to kill 12 men. The hunt for Mary Ann Cotton was over. The trial was about to begin. When the test results came back showing massive amounts of arsenic in Charles Edward Cotton's body, the police knew they had a murder. But was it an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern? Thomas Riley gave them the answer. He told them about Mary Ann's comment, "Maybe he'll go like all the rest." He told them about all the deaths in her household over the past year. Frederick Cotton, Margaret Cotton, Joseph Nattrass, Frederick Cotton Jr., all dead within months. The police began checking burial records, and what they found was staggering. They obtained permission to exhume the recent bodies. One by one, they dug up the graves in the West Auckland churchyard. It was grim, disturbing work, opening coffins, examining decomposing remains, taking samples of organs and tissue to send for analysis. Joseph Nattrass, exhumed, tested. Result, arsenic, lots of it. Frederick Cotton, Sr., exhumed, tested. Result, arsenic. Frederick Cotton, Jr., exhumed, tested. Result, arsenic. 4 bodies, 4 murder victims, all poisoned by arsenic, all dead within the past year, all connected to one woman, Mary Ann Cotton. The police wanted to exhume more bodies, older victims, people Mary Ann had killed in other towns, but this required complicated legal permissions, cooperation from multiple jurisdictions, and significant expense. The authorities decided they had enough evidence already. 4 proven arsenic murders were sufficient for trial and conviction. But investigators began tracing Mary Ann's movements backward through her life. They went to Sunderland, where she had lived with James Robinson. They interviewed Robinson, who told them about the deaths in his household, his 3 children, Mary Ann's daughter Isabella, her mother Margaret. All dead within months of Mary Ann's arrival. Robinson admitted he had suspected something was wrong, that he had refused to insure his life because he didn't trust her. They went to other towns where Mary Ann had lived. In each place, they found the same story. Mary Ann arrives, people die. Mary Ann collects insurance and moves on. They found records of her purchasing arsenic from chemists' shops. She always gave the same excuse. She needed it for rats or bedbugs. The shopkeepers remembered her because she bought it so frequently. The police began to assemble a list of victims. The number grew and grew. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 21 people. Some investigators believed it could be as high as 40. 21 murders. 40 murders. The numbers were almost incomprehensible. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't even a typical murder case. This was industrial-scale serial killing. And the killer was a 40-year-old mother, a woman who looked like everyone's neighbor, who smiled and went to church and appeared perfectly normal. On September 18th, 1872, police arrested Mary Ann Cotton on suspicion of murdering Charles Edward Cotton. She was at her home in West Auckland when they came for her. She denied everything. She was shocked, insulted, indignant. How dare they accuse her of such a thing? She was a respectable woman. She had suffered terrible losses. Her husbands, her children, her stepchildren. And now, instead of sympathy, she was being accused of murder. It was outrageous, she said. It was persecution. She had done nothing wrong. The police were unmoved. They charged her with murder and took her to Durham County Jail to await trial. When news of Mary Ann Cotton's arrest reached the newspapers, it exploded into a national scandal. The papers called her the Black Widow, the West Auckland poisoner, the female fiend. Every newspaper in Britain covered the story. The details were too sensational to ignore. A woman who had murdered her own children, her husbands, anyone who inconvenienced her, all for small insurance payouts. The Victorian public was horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Public opinion turned against Mary Ann immediately and absolutely. There was no sympathy for her, no suggestion that she might be innocent. The evidence was too overwhelming, and her crimes too monstrous. Women were supposed to be the moral center of Victorian society, pure, maternal, self-sacrificing. The idea of a woman as a serial killer, especially one who killed children, violated everything Victorian culture believed about gender. But there was also a dark fascination. People bought newspapers to read every detail. They discussed the case in pubs and parlors. They speculated about her motives, her methods, her psychology. Mary Ann Cotton became the most famous criminal in England, and she was going to face the most famous prosecutor in the country. The Crown appointed Sir Charles Russell to lead the prosecution. Russell was one of the most brilliant lawyers in Britain. He would later become Lord Chief Justice, the highest judicial position in the land. He was known for his meticulous preparation, his devastating cross-examinations, and his perfect record in murder trials. Russell knew this case would define his career. If he could successfully prosecute Mary Ann Cotton, if he could prove that a woman, a mother, was capable of such systematic evil, it would be a landmark case. He assembled a mountain of evidence. The forensic reports showing arsenic in 4 bodies, testimony from doctors about the victim's symptoms, records of Mary Ann purchasing arsenic, insurance documents showing she benefited financially from every death witness testimony about her behavior and her statements. The pattern of deaths following her from town to town. Russell decided to try Mary Ann for only one murder, Charles Edward Cotton. This was strategic. The evidence for Charles's murder was strongest. His body had been examined immediately, the arsenic clearly present, the chain of custody unbroken. If they could convict her for Charles's murder, she would hang. There was no need to complicate the case by trying to prove 20 other murders. But everyone understood that the trial was really about all of them, about every child, every husband, every victim in Mary Ann's 20-year killing spree. Mary Ann's lawyers faced an impossible task. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but they had to mount some defense. Their strategy was to claim that Charles Edward Cotton died of natural causes, and the arsenic found in his body came from environmental contamination. This was not as absurd as it sounds. Arsenic was so common in Victorian homes, in wallpaper, paint, medicines, that low-level environmental exposure was real. But the amount of arsenic in Charles's body was enormous, far beyond what environmental exposure could explain. He would have had to lick the wallpaper for weeks to accumulate that much poison. The defense also tried to portray Mary Ann as a victim, a poor woman who had suffered terrible losses, who was being persecuted because she was unlucky. She had lost husbands and children, yes, but that wasn't evidence of murder. That was evidence of the hard life of the Victorian poor. It was a weak defense, and everyone knew it. Mary Ann Cotton spent the winter of 1872 to 1873 in Durham County Jail, awaiting trial. She was held in a cold, damp cell, given minimal food, and allowed few visitors. She was also pregnant. Whether the father was Frederick Cotton or Joseph Nattrass or someone else, we don't know. But Mary Ann gave birth in the prison in January 1873 to a baby girl she named Margaret Edith Quick Manning Cotton. Sources vary on the exact name. The baby was taken from her shortly after birth and placed with a foster family. Mary Ann would never see her child again. This baby, this innocent child, was the only one of Mary Ann's offspring to survive her mother. Every other child Mary Ann had born or raised was dead, most of them by her own hand. The trial was set for March 1873. It would last 3 days, a relatively short time for such a serious case. But the evidence was so clear, the guilt so obvious, that there was little to argue about. The question was not whether Mary Ann Cotton had killed Charles Edward. The question was whether the jury could bring themselves to believe that a woman, a mother, was capable of such evil. Whether they could condemn her to death. Victorian society desperately wanted to believe that women were naturally good, that mothers especially were incapable of harming children. Mary Ann Cotton challenged that belief at its core. The trial would force 12 men to look at the evidence and accept a terrible truth, that monsters come in all forms, even the form of a devoted mother bringing her sick child a cup of tea. Durham Assizes, the courthouse, was packed. Every seat was filled with spectators who had lined up for hours to get inside. Hundreds more crowded the streets outside, hoping for news. This was the trial of the century, and everyone wanted to witness history. Mary Ann Cotton was led into the dock. She was 40 years old now, thin from her months in prison, dressed in black mourning clothes. She looked like exactly what Victorian society expected a widow to look like: respectable, pious, grieving. But the spectators stared at her with a mix of fascination and horror. This ordinary-looking woman had killed at least 21 people. How was that possible? The judge was Sir Thomas Archibald. The prosecutor was Sir Charles Russell. Mary Ann's defense lawyers were barely worth mentioning. They knew this was a doomed case, but they had to go through the motions. The charge was read: that Mary Ann Cotton did willfully murder Charles Edward Cotton by administering arsenic to him. Mary Ann pleaded not guilty in a clear, firm voice. She showed no emotion, no fear, no shame. Sir Charles Russell stood to give his opening statement. He was brilliant, methodical, devastating. He laid out the facts simply. Charles Edward Cotton died on March 12, 1872. His stepmother, Mary Ann Cotton, was his primary caregiver. His symptoms were consistent with arsenic poisoning. His body contained massive amounts of arsenic. Mary Ann had purchased arsenic shortly before his death. Mary Ann was the beneficiary of an insurance policy on Charles's life. And, most damningly, Charles was just one of many people in Mary Ann's life who had died under suspicious circumstances. Russell didn't try to prove all the other murders in detail. He simply presented the pattern. He showed the jury the list of names. William Mowbray, dead. George Ward, dead. Multiple children, dead. Frederick Cotton, dead. Margaret Cotton, dead. Joseph Nattrass, dead. Gentlemen of the jury, Russell said, this is not merely a case of one murder. This is a case of systematic poisoning. This woman has been killing for profit for 20 years. Then came the witnesses. Dr. Kilburn testified about treating Charles Edward in his final illness. He described the symptoms, the vomiting, the pain, the rapid deterioration. He explained why he had refused to sign the death certificate, why he insisted on an autopsy. Thomas Riley testified about his conversation with Mary Ann. He repeated her chilling words. Maybe he'll go like all the rest of the Cotton family. The courtroom went silent as he spoke. Those words were damning. They showed foreknowledge. They showed intent. The forensic experts testified about the autopsy. They explained the Marsh test, how it detected arsenic in human tissue. They presented their findings. Charles Edward Cotton's organs contained massive amounts of arsenic trioxide. Not trace amounts, not environmental contamination. Enough arsenic to kill multiple adults. In your expert opinion, Russell asked, what caused the death of Charles Edward Cotton? Arsenic poisoning, administered over several days, the expert replied. There is no doubt whatsoever. Shopkeepers testified about selling arsenic to Mary Ann Cotton. Yes, they remembered her. She had bought arsenic powder on multiple occasions. She said it was for rats. James Robinson testified about his time with Mary Ann. He described the deaths in his household, his children, her daughter, her mother. He admitted his suspicions, his refusal to insure his life. The jury listened, understanding that Robinson had narrowly escaped becoming a victim himself. Insurance agents presented documents showing that Mary Ann had insured every person who died in her care. Every single one. The policies were small, but they added up. Over 20 years, she'd collected hundreds of pounds, a significant sum for a working-class woman. The pattern was undeniable. Mary Ann Cotton moved through life, leaving a trail of corpses behind her. She nursed people devotedly as they died. She collected their insurance. She moved on. Mary Ann's defense lawyers did what they could, which was very little. They argued that arsenic was everywhere in Victorian homes. The wallpaper, the paint, the medicines. Perhaps Charles had been exposed to arsenic accidentally. Perhaps he had eaten something contaminated. The forensic experts destroyed this argument in cross-examination. The amount of arsenic in Charles's body was far, far beyond what environmental exposure could cause. He had been deliberately poisoned, repeatedly, over days. The defense tried to argue that other people had access to Charles. Perhaps someone else poisoned him. But who? Mary Ann was his primary caregiver. She prepared his food. She brought him his tea. No one else had the opportunity. The defense tried to paint Mary Ann as a victim of circumstance, a woman who had suffered terrible losses, who was now being persecuted because of bad luck and circumstantial evidence. But Sir Charles Russell rose for his rebuttal and methodically shredded this argument. Bad luck? He asked the jury. Is it bad luck when 3 husbands die under your care? Is it bad luck when 11 of your children die? Is it bad luck when your stepchildren die? When your lover dies? When your mother dies? When everyone around you dies, and you alone profit? No, gentlemen. This is not bad luck. This is murder. Systematic, calculated, cold-blooded murder. The trial lasted 3 days. On March 7th, 1873, the jury retired to consider their verdict. They were gone for 90 minutes. Some reports say just over an hour. For a murder trial, this was remarkably quick. It suggested the jury had little doubt. When they returned, the foreman stood. "How do you find the defendant?" the judge asked. "Guilty, my lord." The courtroom erupted. Spectators gasped. Some applauded. Others wept. The judge called for order. Mary Ann Cotton showed almost no reaction. She blinked. Her face might have paled slightly, but she remained standing, composed, dignified. The judge addressed her. "Mary Ann Cotton, you have been found guilty of the willful murder of Charles Edward Cotton. Have you anything to say before sentence is passed?" Mary Ann spoke in a clear voice. "I am not guilty. I have been wrongly convicted." The judge was unmoved. He donned the traditional black cap, a piece of black cloth placed on the judge's wig to signify a death sentence, and spoke the words that would end her life. "Mary Ann Cotton, you shall be taken from this place to a place of lawful execution, and there you shall be hanged by the neck until you are dead. And may God have mercy on your soul." "Amen," said the court. Mary Ann was led away to the cells beneath the courthouse. She would spend her final 3 weeks in Durham County Jail, awaiting execution. In prison, Mary Ann continued to maintain her innocence. She wrote letters to newspapers protesting her conviction. She claimed she was the victim of prejudice, that the evidence against her was false, that she was being executed for the crime of being an unlucky woman. The prison chaplain visited her daily, urging her to confess, to repent, to seek forgiveness from God before she faced judgment. Mary Ann refused. She would not confess. To the very end, she insisted she had done nothing wrong. Historians debate what this means. Was she genuinely delusional, unable to accept the reality of her crimes? Was she a psychopath, incapable of feeling guilt or remorse? Or was she simply stubborn, refusing to give society the satisfaction of a confession? We will never know what went on in her mind during those final weeks, but we know she wrote to her remaining family, asking them to care for her infant daughter. We know she slept poorly, according to guards. We know she ate little, and we know that on the morning of March 24th, 1873, she dressed carefully in the black dress provided for her execution and walked calmly to the gallows. The execution took place in Durham County Jail, in a yard enclosed by high walls so the public could not see. But a crowd of hundreds gathered outside the prison, waiting to hear the bell that would signal her death. The executioner was William Calcraft, a man who had been hanging criminals for decades. He was old now, and his technique was considered brutal even by Victorian standards. Calcraft used the short drop method, where the condemned fell only a few feet. This method did not break the neck quickly. Instead, it caused death by slow strangulation. Mary Ann Cotton was led to the gallows. Her hands were bound. A white hood was placed over her head. The noose was fitted around her neck. The chaplain said a final prayer. Mary Ann said nothing, or if she did, it was too quiet to hear. Calcraft pulled the lever. The trapdoor opened. Mary Ann dropped. And then, horror. The drop was too short. Her neck did not break. She did not die instantly. For 3 long minutes, Mary Ann Cotton strangled at the end of the rope, slowly suffocating, her body convulsing. It was a botched execution, a terrible death even for a convicted murderer. Finally, she was still. The doctor examined her body and pronounced her dead. The bell tolled. Outside the prison walls, the crowd heard it and knew Mary Ann Cotton, the Black Widow, the Angel of Death, was gone. She was 40 years old. She had murdered at least 21 people, possibly many more. She had been caught, tried, and executed in the space of 7 months. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison walls, as was customary for executed criminals. No gravestone, no memorial. Just an unmarked plot in unconsecrated ground. Mary Ann Cotton had erased so many people from existence. Now society attempted to erase her. But the story doesn't end with her death. Because Mary Ann Cotton's crimes raised questions that Victorian society struggled to answer. How had she killed for 20 years without being caught? What did her case reveal about the blind spots in Victorian society? What did it say about women, about motherhood, about the assumptions that allowed a monster to hide in plain sight? And most importantly, who were her victims? Who were the people she destroyed? They deserve to be remembered as more than just a number, more than just a statistic in the story of a serial killer. Let us honor them now. Let us speak their names. For 20 years, Mary Ann Cotton murdered people. She killed children, husbands, stepchildren, lovers, relatives. She moved from town to town across northern England, leaving bodies in her wake. And until 1872, no one stopped her. Why? The answer reveals everything about Victorian society's blind spots. First, infant mortality was so high that child deaths weren't questioned. In 1850s to 1860s England, almost half of all children born in working-class families died before age 5. When Mary Ann's children died, doctors assumed it was normal. Tragic, yes, but normal. No one suspected murder because death was too common to be suspicious. Second, women weren't considered capable of serial murder. Victorian ideology held that women were naturally nurturing, maternal, moral. A woman might kill in passion. Poisoning an abusive husband was not unheard of, but systematic, calculated, repeated murder for money? That was inconceivable. Women were victims or saints, not predators. Third, arsenic poisoning looked like disease. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach pain, dehydration, were identical to cholera, gastric fever, and dysentery. These diseases killed thousands every year. Doctors had no reason to suspect poison unless they had specific cause for suspicion. Fourth, forensic science was in its infancy. The Marsh test for detecting arsenic in human tissue had only been invented in 1836. It wasn't widely used until the 1860s to 1870s. Before that, proving arsenic poisoning was nearly impossible. Mary Ann's early victims could not have been proven to be murder victims, even if someone had suspected. Fifth, she moved constantly. Mary Ann never stayed in one place long enough for a pattern to become visible. She would kill in one town, collect insurance, move to another town. Each community only saw a few deaths. No single doctor, no single official saw the full scope of her crimes. Sixth, the victims were poor. Working-class deaths weren't investigated thoroughly. There were no detectives assigned to look into the death of a laborer's child. Police resources went to protecting the wealthy, not the poor. Mary Ann's victims were invisible to the justice system. All of these factors combined to create perfect hunting ground for a killer. Mary Ann Cotton was not uniquely clever or careful. She was simply operating in a system that made her type of crime almost impossible to detect. Until, finally, one person noticed the pattern. Thomas Riley, a minor local official who heard Mary Ann predict a child's death and thought, "That's strange." His suspicion, his willingness to report it, and the new forensic science available, these three things finally stopped Mary Ann Cotton. But it was 20 years too late for her victims. Victorian burial clubs were meant to be a humanitarian innovation. Working-class families pooled their resources, paying a penny or two per week into a collective fund. When someone died, the family received a few pounds to cover funeral costs. Without this system, many families would have had to bury their loved ones in paupers' graves. But the system had a dark side. It created a financial incentive for death. For someone like Mary Ann Cotton, who had no moral compass, burial clubs were an opportunity. Each child she insured represented £3 to £5. Each husband, £10 to £20. She was paid more when they died than when they lived. Some Victorian reformers called burial clubs murder clubs. Investigations in the 1870s found that suspicious child deaths often occurred in families with burial club insurance. Mary Ann Cotton was not the only person exploiting the system. She was simply the most prolific. After her case became public, there were calls for reform. Some wanted burial clubs banned entirely. Others argued for better oversight, for requiring medical examinations before paying out, for limiting the amount of insurance that could be taken out on children. Reforms were enacted, but slowly. The balance between providing necessary support for poor families and preventing murder for profit was difficult to strike. Mary Ann Cotton's crimes revealed the perverse incentives created when death has financial value. Victorian culture had a specific ideal of womanhood, summarized in the phrase, "the angel in the house," from a popular poem by Coventry Patmore. The ideal woman was devoted to her family, self-sacrificing, morally pure, nurturing and maternal, submissive to male authority. The moral center of the home. This ideology wasn't just cultural, it was legal and economic. Women had few rights, few options for work, and were legally subordinate to their husbands. But in exchange, they were placed on a pedestal as morally superior, as the guardians of virtue and family. Mary Ann Cotton used this ideology as camouflage. She appeared to be exactly what society expected: a devoted mother, a caring nurse, a woman who sacrificed herself to tend to sick family members. When her children died, people assumed she was a tragic, suffering mother. When her husbands died, she was a devoted widow. No one suspected her because she looked like the angel she was supposed to be. The Mary Ann Cotton case shattered this illusion. It forced Victorian society to confront the fact that women could be evil, that mothers could be killers, that the angel in the house might be a predator. The case was so threatening to Victorian gender ideology that some people simply refused to believe it. Even after her conviction, some argued she must have been insane or coerced, or that the evidence was fabricated. The alternative, that a sane, rational woman could methodically murder 21 people, including her own children, was too disturbing to accept. But the evidence was irrefutable. Mary Ann Cotton was guilty, and she was sane. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it anyway. Modern criminal psychologists have analyzed Mary Ann Cotton's case extensively. While we can't diagnose her definitively, certain patterns are clear. She was almost certainly a psychopath. She showed no empathy, no remorse, no emotional connection to her victims. She could watch children suffer and die, her own children, and feel nothing. She was motivated primarily by financial gain. Unlike many serial killers who kill for sexual gratification or psychological compulsion, Mary Ann killed for money. Small amounts of money, which makes it even more chilling. She valued a few pounds more than a child's life. She killed for convenience. When people became obstacles, stepchildren preventing a new marriage, a husband who wouldn't ensure his life, she simply eliminated them. Murder was a solution to everyday problems. She was narcissistic. Her continued proclamations of innocence, even when evidence was overwhelming, suggest she believed she was special, above the law, entitled to do as she pleased. She was calculating and patient. She planned her murders carefully, maintained her cover for decades, and adapted her methods as needed. She wasn't impulsive or reckless. She was methodical. Mary Ann Cotton fits the profile of what we now call a Black Widow killer, a woman who murders family members systematically for profit. Such killers are rare, but not unique. They often go undetected for years because they violate our assumptions about women and mothers. For too long, Mary Ann Cotton's victims have been remembered only as numbers. At least 21 dead, possibly 40 victims. But they were not numbers. They were people. Let us honor them by speaking their names when we know them. Her own children, multiple children from her first marriage, names mostly lost to history. Isabella Mowbray, died 1867, age unknown. Margaret Jane, dates unknown. Her husbands, William Mowbray, died 1865. George Ward, died 1866. Frederick Cotton, died 1871. James Robinson's children, James Robinson Jr., died 1867. Another Robinson child, name unknown, died 1867. A third Robinson child, name unknown, died 1867. Her mother, Margaret Robson, died 1867, within 9 days of visiting Mary Ann. Frederick Cotton's family. Margaret Cotton, Frederick's sister, died 1872. Frederick Cotton Jr., died 1872, age 10. Charles Edward Cotton, died March 12, 1872, age 7. Her lover, Joseph Nattrass, died 1872. And there were others, children who died in infancy, whose names were never recorded, neighbors, acquaintances, anyone who was inconvenient. The full list will never be known. Each of these people had a life that mattered. They had families who loved them. They had hopes and dreams. And their lives were stolen by someone they trusted, someone who should have protected them. The children especially deserve our remembrance. They were innocent. They had no choice, no way to escape. When they felt sick, they cried for their mother to help them, and their mother brought them poison. Charles Edward Cotton, age 7, died calling for Mary Ann to save him. She was all he had, and she was the one killing him. How does a mother kill her own children? This is the question that makes Mary Ann Cotton's case so disturbing. Even 150 years later, we can understand murder in anger. We can understand murder for survival. We can even understand murder for large sums of money. But Mary Ann murdered her own children for £3 apiece. She watched them suffer and die for the price of a few weeks' rent. Some possible explanations: lack of maternal bonding. In an era of high infant mortality, some mothers emotionally distance themselves from children, expecting them to die. Mary Ann may never have bonded with any of her children. Pure financial desperation. Poverty can drive people to terrible acts. Mary Ann may have initially killed out of desperate need for money, then continued when she discovered how easy it was. Psychopathy, the most likely explanation. She lacked the capacity for normal human empathy. Her children weren't people to her. They were assets or liabilities. Habituation. The first murder is hard, the second is easier. By the 20th, it's routine. Mary Ann may have become so desensitized that murder was simply a tool she used, like any other. Whatever the explanation, the fact remains. Mary Ann Cotton killed her own children and showed no remorse. Even at her execution, she proclaimed her innocence. She never admitted what she'd done. She never apologized to the families she'd destroyed. She died as she lived, cold, calculating, and convinced she'd done nothing wrong. Mary Ann Cotton was executed in 1873. Her case shocked Victorian England and remains one of the most horrifying examples of serial murder in British history. She killed at least 21 people, possibly more than 40. She killed for petty amounts of money. She killed her own children. She was caught only because forensic science had advanced just enough, and one man was paying just enough attention. Her story reveals the darkness that can exist behind the most ordinary face, in the most domestic setting. It reveals how society's blind spots about gender, about motherhood, about class, can allow evil to flourish. But most importantly, it reveals the importance of remembering the victims, not the killer, but the people she killed. The children who should have grown up, the men who should have grown old, the families that should have stayed together. Mary Ann Cotton wanted to be remembered. She wanted to be famous. But we should remember her victims instead. If you found this story important, please like this video and subscribe. These dark chapters of history deserve to be told, and the victims deserve to be remembered. Share this with someone who loves true crime or British history. In the comments, I want to hear your thoughts. How could Victorian society have prevented Mary Ann Cotton? What reforms should have been enacted after her case? Let me know what you think. Thank you for bearing witness to this tragedy. Thank you for remembering the victims. May they finally rest in peace, and may we learn from history's darkest lessons.